We were going to start this meeting. Let me get...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, Mayor Hyatt's not here to do the opening, so...
I don't know anything.
Did I do the opening? Your last time? I did the opening last week, or 2 weeks ago, so... Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out tonight. In Mayor Hyatt's absence, I'm sure he's on his way. We'll get here momentarily, but we'll go ahead. It's at the top of the hour now, so we'll go ahead and start. The agenda does have Mayor Hyatt giving the opening, but I've asked Councilmember Lee to offer us that opening, and if possible, Councilmember Garn, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance? You bet. Wonderful.
Our dear and kind Heavenly Father, how grateful we are that we're able to come together and to meet in this land of the free and the home of the brave, to be able to make decisions, to listen to the citizens of this city, and to be able to discuss those things that matter to what happens and to make those choices that we need to. And we're grateful for these opportunities, and we pray that we will be able to conduct ourselves in a way that is respectful and kind. And these things we do humbly pray for in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Will the audience please arise and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Garn. Once again, welcome everybody tonight to our City Council meeting for Kaysville City. Just by way of introductions, we'll go around the table. I am Chris Snell. I serve on the City Council and am covering for Mayor Hyatt as Mayor Pro Tem this year.
Jake Garn, City Council.
Dave Adams.
Susan Lee, City Council.
Larry Page, City Council.
Shane Scott, City Manager.
Maria Devereaux, City Recorder.
Nick Mills, City Attorney.
Andy Thompson, Engineer.
Thank you for those introductions. And for anyone who would like one, there are agendas on the wall in a little holder over here. So if you would like to grab one off the wall, you're certainly welcome to take a look at that, to grab one and be able to get your eyes on it. We now have Mayor Hyatt stepping into the room. As he's sitting down, our next item on the agenda is call to the public. There are no... I'll go ahead and let you speak, Mayor. You always say this so fluidly.
Next item on our agenda is call to the public. This is the time in our City Council meeting when we open the microphone to any of you in attendance that would like to address the City Council. We do not have any public hearings scheduled as part of tonight's agenda items, so if you'd like to speak to the City Council regarding one of tonight's agenda items, this is your opportunity to do so. We do ask that you should keep your comments limited to 3 minutes, so when you hear a subtle beeping up front, that's an indication that your time has expired, and we would ask you to wrap up your comments. So with that, call to the public.
Yeah, as if any of you didn't know, I'm Dean Wall, back again. I'm still complaining about the fact that I still have to pay $10 per parking thing to park in front of my place. I still haven't got that, but I did give the mayor a parting gift there. There's actually several things in there, but one of them you could probably use tonight when you go home, but I won't say what it is, but yeah. Just a partial rub is all. But I did give him what his favorite treat is, and they are cold, so they've been in the refrigerator. But yeah, if we could consider that someday, I know it's not on the agenda, and it probably won't be, but that's my complaint. Other than that, you guys do a wonderful job. That includes everybody here. So thanks.
Thanks, Dean.
Councilors, my name is Doug Farr, Mayor. I represent the Taylors and Tices. and just making public comment on item A8, final plat PRUD overlay zone approval for Whisper Hollow subdivision. Today I filed a notice of appeal with the City Council and city representatives based on certain findings that were made by the Planning Commission last Thursday. We received the plans for this development the following day after they had been promised to us 2 weeks earlier by both the developer and the city engineer. And after an email and grandma request, we did not receive those documents, but did receive them the day after the findings were made on the record by the Planning Commission. So we did file that notice of appeal today, and we request that that be heard before any further decisions by the City Council on that issue.
Thank you.
And if there's no other questions, that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other items for call to the public?
My name is Robin Tolman, and my remarks are concerning Dave Whitaker's property. I base my comments on Kaysville City Code 19-1-1, public welfare, and portions of 19-1-2, number 2, variances. Under the public welfare, it says, any proposed subdivision and its ultimate use shall be in the best interests of the public welfare and the neighborhood development of the area concerned. Under variances, it says the City Council may grant a variance if there are special circumstances attached to the property that do not generally apply to other properties in the same zone, and the variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest, and comes from circumstances peculiar to the property. Well, that's exactly what we have here. The special circumstances peculiar and unique to this property is a 75-person assisted living facility plus visitors. There is no fence between their outdoor commons area and a through street due to fire safety. And the variance not contrary to the public interest would be a posted private road. At the last City Council meeting, one of you said, when you weigh this to every other subdivision, this through street is not abnormal. Common sense and reason tell us that this is not every other subdivision. With that 75-person assisted living center plus visitors and no fence between them and the road, we need to take that into consideration. These are people with physical and mental limitations. This is not a lockdown facility. They are free to go outside, and their area that they have to be outside is along that road. Another of you said that when they developed these subdivisions, they were developed in a way that it was necessary to have a secondary access to create a safe environment. Well, that is the goal of all the citizens involved here, too. We are concerned with everyday safety. This connecting road will have 2 turns. One is sharper than 90 degrees and the other a blind corner. Neither are designed for daily through traffic. So what is reasonable and acceptable here? Variances are allowed on the merits of each situation, and we would implore that the City Council designate this connecting road as a private street in the best interest of the public welfare and area concerned, as well as the safety of all. We feel like this is reasonable and acceptable, and this council has the ability to do that tonight, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dino Pasco, and I live on Whisper Creek Drive. I hope you don't mind if I read my notes, but I jotted down a few thoughts so that I would stay concise and stay within my allotted time. Seems like we've been discussing this road or gate for some time now. I, like most of my neighbors on Whisper Creek, purchased our lots with the intention of living in Kaysville in a nice, quiet cul-de-sac. Now we understand that this was never the intention, and it was talked about as the subdivision was being approved, but I also understand that there's really nothing in writing on this. You also have other neighbors on 550 who lived on a nice, quiet street for years, and there have been no issues. So when all this started, we listened to why the city wanted this street to go through. And instead of fighting your issues, we tried to propose other options that would please both sides and be a good compromise. We're very fortunate to be working with Mr. Whitaker, who has been more than willing to work with us and the city to find a mutually beneficial solution. The plan you're seeing this evening, I feel like Mr. Whitaker's been forced to submit a plan that isn't mutually beneficial, but his hands were forced because it's what the city wanted. It's been made very clear that the city planner wants more through roads, and we can understand that. But in every meeting I've attended and many emails I've received, it's been stated that every situation is unique and should be looked at differently. All we're asking for here is that you listen to what the citizens of Kaysville want and be willing to work on a compromise. Whether that's a public street or a private dead-end street that ends at Whisper Creek with a private road or gate at the end that doesn't interfere with the assisted living center. Either way, we just hope that you'll listen to the desires of the people and compromise with us. Your planning commission listened to both sides of the story and unanimously agreed that a gate would work just fine. At your last meeting, you didn't get to hear from all of us because we didn't think it was necessary. We believed that it was a formality since the City Planning Commission had already approved it. We now know that that wasn't the case, and we want you to know what your citizens want and desire. We ask that you make your decision this evening as you consider the desires of the people. Why is it more important that your city planner and manager have their wants and recommendations met, when to my knowledge, neither of whom live in these neighborhoods, than the wants and desires of two entire neighborhoods? We've not heard from one citizen who opposes a private gated road. We're not asking for anything that is against the law or against any current ordinances that are on the books. We're just asking for things that have already been done in the city. These roads were approved by you, and I'm sure that they would not have been if they were against any current ordinances. The 550 neighborhood has been this way for years and years. We're not setting any new precedences here, or these precedences already exist with private roads, both gated and non-gated, throughout the city. We know that the city would prefer not having a long cul-de-sac, but it was approved and we have not had any issues. And there are others like it in the city. We're asking for the city to approve a compromise that will please both sides. It's my hopes that as you vote this evening, you'll consider the wants and needs of the tax-paying citizens of Kaysville and not just your city manager and planner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I am Michael Sheets and also live in the neighborhood of 594 East, 655 South, and would like to address Dave Whitaker's application. I would ask the City Council to include in his application the option for making a connecting street a private street. That private street can be built to city standard city street specifications, but it would be identified as a private street for use of the people in that HOA and for emergency vehicles, and it would be identified by signage and by any subdivision entrance identification format that they would like to, that would help make it stand out as a private street. The city may desire the connecting street to be a public street, a public through street, although it appears not many other citizens do. Because there was never any specific timetable for development of a connecting street, and because residents in the adjacent neighborhoods and those extending east to Highway 89 already have established traffic patterns, I doubt that they have any strong desire for a connecting street to be present in this new development. And it should also be noted, as Robin mentioned, that Dave Whitaker's development involves some unique characteristics. It involves a small piece of property that uses up all available land in that area. There's not any further land for development, and it's going to be adjacent to an assisted living facility. Consequently, our concerns really regard the presence of traffic mitigation in this development. No one can say how much traffic is going to be bared by this new street, but it's a concern that with the assisted living facility and with the guests and visitors from that traffic may become a problem, particularly during the early morning hours and the evening hours during rush hour. And that's exactly the time that these people who live in the nursing facility are likely to be outside when it's going to be not as hot as in the middle of the traffic, in the middle of the day. Other traffic mitigation possibilities are going to be difficult in this area because the streets weren't designed for stop signs or for stop lights. If the city wants to consider traffic mitigation and make this a private street, which is likely to be the best way to mitigate traffic, now is the time for the city to consider that. The worst that could happen is that people in Kaysville don't obey don't respect the private nature of the road and use the street as a public through street. If that happens, then I would imagine the HOA people would ask the city to just take over the street because there's no need for them to maintain a private street. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Perry Oaks, also live in Whisper Creek. I didn't write anything down because if I would have had to throw it away because it was too frustrating. The purpose of government is to work for the people, the constituents. And I feel in this time that there was already a predetermined decision from the City Council and not working then for the people, with the people. You came in with already determined what you were going to do with contrived arguments that were blatantly false. All we're asking for, and what we said 2 weeks ago, and we weren't allowed to talk afterwards, was the fact that there was a compromise that seemed reasonable for the City Council to at least entertain, but you weren't even willing to entertain it. All we're asking is that you work with us, the folks who voted you in, on compromise. What works best? We all want what's best for our neighborhood and for the city, and we're willing to do that. We just ask that you work with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Greg Hill, also in Whisper Creek. Again, I mentioned this in the last meeting, but I bought specifically on Whisper Creek because of the private nature of the road, without any understanding that there were side deals or other things that were going on that we did not know about. We were not informed. In fact, I was told specifically by Symphony that it was going to be a through road, or not a through road, that would be a cul-de-sac and what a great private road to live on. That was the selling pitch. And I was really horrified and surprised to find out that things were different than explained to me. Now, again, that's the developer, and I don't know really, because there's not much in the minutes, I don't know what side deals were really struck to put that in. But we really do want you to listen to the citizens. And I know some of you have sent emails saying that you're listening to us. 100% of the people have said they don't want a through road. Nobody above us, and you would think we in Whisper Creek would want a real quick access out. We don't. We don't want that. Nobody above us has come in here and asked for a through road. It's just the Planning Commission and yourselves, and we don't understand it. I thought that Dave Adams had a very good idea in that let's table it, let's sit down, let's really figure out. Maybe we lock ourselves in a room and we figure out a compromise. We have Dave Whitaker willing to pay for whatever we need. We can move the gate so it doesn't affect fire. There's a lot of things that can be done here. A private road would mitigate some of the traffic and probably would help. I read one of the emails today that I was a little disheartened by, that you felt that the traffic wouldn't be more than 4 cars a minute coming through the street. Well, to us that thought we were buying a private road, that's a lot of traffic. And, anyway, I'm proud to be in Kaysville after 30 years in Bountiful, but I am very disappointed the way this has gone so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jared Shoup. I will be a future resident on Whisper Creek Drive. house has been started. And I echo the sentiments of my neighbors. I'm kind of new to this issue and have had to catch myself up. And we unfortunately live at the bottom of that cul-de-sac, and we're disheartened to know that at night we're going to get headlights shining into our windows. I mean, we're spending a considerable amount of money, and I'll admit that I'm up here for personal and selfish reasons, I think. But I would also say that the developer has developed his land and put a 75-unit assisted living facility for his own financial gain as well. And I think with residents and a developer that agree on a solution, I feel like the City Council has an obligation to listen to the immediate and impacted residents. I don't understand why we're trying to squeeze more traffic flow through an area that has Laurelwood to the north and Nichols to the south. It seems like we're trying to accommodate yet to be developed residents in this facility and their visiting families, and really residents of Fruit Heights that need to get to Main Street faster. Because residents of Kaysville have been living with the traffic flow and are fine with the traffic flow. There's nobody here yet that has opposed our view of not putting a road through. So I don't think we're really benefiting anybody but people that don't live here yet and people in Fruit Heights that want to get to Main Street faster off of Fence Post Road. I also think maybe the process was done a little backwards. I think this issue should have been brought up upon the approval of the healthcare facility. And I think this issue could have been addressed then, but toothpaste is kind of out of the tube with the facility approved, and now we've got to try and fit a road and another subdivision in it and create these issues from June to now, or August to now December. And I just think that the road should have been addressed at that time, especially with a rezone to a big facility like that, that would have impacted so many households in that area. And I don't think that issue was addressed at the proper time. So now here we are trying to fit in an issue with an outgoing council or some members of an outgoing council, an outgoing mayor, and incoming mayor, and it seems like there's some haste here, and people aren't being listened to. Lastly, the gate issue and the public safety issue. I was a member of Las Vegas, the gated community capital of the world. There were gated communities within gated communities. And technology is there. It exists to not impede emergency vehicles. So the issue that we're going to slow down emergency vehicles because of a gate, to me, is a non-issue. And there could be some significant research done because the technology exists to not have that be an issue. I appreciate you listening. I look forward to being a member or a resident of Kaysville. Thank you.
Thanks you.
Hi, my name is Julie Wall, and I live on 662 South, 550 East, the older part, and we've lived there for 28 plus years, almost 29, and we're so thankful that we've been able to live there as long as we have, and it's been a great neighborhood, and we're thankful for all the new neighbors in the upper area, even though we're sad the Whitakers are moving because we love them so much. Might cry, but anyway, I just wanted to express my feelings that, I'm thankful for the people that have spoken, and I support what they've said, and I am really amazed positively about how many people have spoke in behalf of how we all have worked together in the unity and the planning commission, that they were able to listen to us, because there were I wasn't here, but I listened to the media on YouTube, and there were 14 people that spoke, and I really felt like the planning commission had listened to us, and I was surprised how everything turned out, but I was thankful for that, but and how everybody had supported that choice. But I just please, I hope that you're listening to us. And we really do care about this great city of Kaysville, and we want it to continue to be the great city that it is. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie.
Any other items for call to the public? Dean, you've already had your chance as much as... but we'll...
I'll just take a second.
Okay.
Just a second. I'm Dean Wall.
It's Christmas.
She must be related to me because all the Walls are, but I have to leave because I have to go make sure that the Jazz win tonight. I've missed the last several games, and I feel like it's my fault that they've been losing, so I got to head down there. So,
thank you for that disclosure.
My name is Vicki Pasqua. I live on Whisper Creek. And I just want to also support the comments that have been made and the research that has been done by Robin and some of the others who have taken the time to thoroughly look into this. I've been participating in these meetings since we started. I think I just missed the last one, which was the surprise to all of us when you all vetoed the gated road. We were absolutely not expecting that based on the meetings that we'd had prior. And we do feel that when the rezoning was brought up, that we were very clearly told we would not and could not discuss the road at that time. So, which is why it wasn't discussed. And having great faith that those concerns would be listened to thoroughly when the appropriate time was allowed to us. We feel that we have voiced our concerns in a very civil and respectful way, and we feel that we have done our due diligence, that we are not just making emotional decisions, but that we have taken time to, people have written letters, they have contacted legal counsel, we have worked closely with Dave Whitaker, who has been beyond helpful and patient with this process, and we do feel that based on the last meeting that his hand is being forced to submit a revised change in a hasty manner, quite honestly, to eliminate him losing possible sales of his lots in the development that he's working on, which is a real disappointment. I think my frustration comes from, as a council, as an elected council, to hear our voice, our tax-paying voices as residents of Kaysville, and to say that you are listening and are concerned about our concerns, and every single voice that has spoke about this is unanimous on making a compromise that is not only doable, possible, but it is totally doable in every aspect. And yet, the concerns that are brought up are for voices that have not spoken up. I've seen in some of the letters, well, the people above were told if that was developed, a road would go through. Where are those people? There has been nobody here saying, please put a through road in. Quite the contrary. The only voices that have spoke has said, please put a private, safe lane or a gated lane to protect the existing residents and especially to protect those that are coming in that care facility. I had a mother in a care facility and I visit her often. And I can tell you, when you go with your kids and grandkids, they're outside playing. And a through road increases their risk greatly. When you go to somewhere where you think you're going to be safe and visit, and you find that this is a through road that comes through. We can't tell how the traffic will be affected, but we know that it will in a negative way. We ask you to please reconsider and to take the time to think about the impact of those in the surrounding areas that have done all that they can to hope that you will listen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jake is.
Can you tell me your name?
Your name?
What's your name?
Jake Walls.
Tell him how old you are.
Turned 25. As a meeting city council with my dad.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to come up and introduce Jake to you guys. I know you've heard his name before in the meeting. I think that you, as well as all of us, try to go and live in a place where we have safety for our children. This is one of my sons who lives in our home. He will be dependent upon us his whole life. We have stayed in that home because of the safety that we have. That's one of the reasons why I think that you've heard as many people come up and have expressed their concerns about having a road go through there and some of the challenges that will be presented for kids like Jacob. Jacob's not, as you know, the only one there. And I appreciate you thinking through the process of all that's been said tonight as you reevaluate people like Jake that lives there. He's impacted there. I can tell you that with the increased amount of traffic, that is a big concern that we have for Jake, and the amount of people that will be going through there with the possibility of him being hit and killed. I think of one fire issue that somebody can come in and get a fireman in there to get somebody saved. And I think of all the cars that will be going through there, much more than a fire truck that will be going through, of the possibility of one of people like Jake that's going to be killed. So if you could please reconsider and think about the things that we've discussed and talked about with you, would be very appreciative. So, Tom, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Jake.
Any other items for call to the public? Mark?
My name is Mike Flood, a resident of Kaysville here, 6070 600 South. First, I want to start out and thank the three of you outgoing members of council, Ms. Lee and Mr. Snell and Mr. Hyatt. Appreciate very much your service over the years, particularly you, Mayor Hyatt, for 10 years of service. I know that the last few years I've had the opportunity of communicating with you via email and other ways, and we don't always see eye to eye, but I appreciate the response and the respect and the ability to be able to talk back and forth. But I do appreciate your service. I know it takes a lot of your time, a lot of time away. I do one last thing. I just ask that as you are outgoing tonight, I understand this meeting isn't necessarily usually on the city. Most cities I deal with, and I do a lot with my job, they don't normally have this meeting. 11th hour right before Christmas. I was surprised to see this be put on that an agenda was created and that you decided to have this meeting. And I realized there's two items towards the end of the agenda: Whisper Creek and Whisperwood, the two Whisper subdivisions. I just ask that you strongly consider the fact that I think that on both situations, in both projects, and I'm a developer, I'm usually asking for you to listen to me, and we try and accommodate the community, but listen to me as a developer. I'm asking you to consider those strongly tonight, tabling them, and at least taking the adequate time necessary, letting those who may not have a dog in this fight or may not have so much invested in it personally, these new council members and a new mayor, to reconsider some of the conditions, some of the issues, and some of the situations that have been discussed and addressed. So I just respectfully request that, and again, thank you for your service and your time on behalf of Kaysville residents. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other items for call to the public?
Hi, my name is Todd Johnson. I live on Whisper Creek Drive. I'm with everybody else against the public road, like the private one in the gate. Something that's been said a lot that I've seen that is a foregone conclusion is, people think that stub road was meant to connect to Whisper Creek Drive for sure. I disagree with that. The reason I disagree with that is the way Whisper Creek Drive is developed, there's not an elbow at the end of that street. There's a cul-de-sac at the end of that street, with the possibility of a through street happening. That's the way Kaysville City wanted it, and that's the way we did it. Because I don't think anybody knew for sure what was going to happen. We certainly didn't realize an assisted living facility would go there, an assisted living facility without fencing and without buffer zones would go in either. And I think what the people are asking for is legitimate. I think that you can give it to them. I think everybody here wants it, the developer, people that live there, and with good reason. I would ask that you consider to make that change. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other items from call to the public? All right, hearing none, we will close call to the public and move to the next item on our agenda, which is declaration of any conflicts of interest. This item is for the City Council members. As you review tonight's agenda items, if you see anything that you may have a conflict of interest, or if that you may see that you have a conflict of interest on any of tonight's agenda items, this would be your opportunity to declare that conflict. Hearing none, we'll move to the next on our agenda, which is playground equipment purchase. Mr. Stevens.
Cole Stevens with the Parks and Recreation. Hopefully you're all familiar with Pioneer Park. We don't want to go into too many details about Pioneer Park. It's been on the agenda a few times this year. But this request tonight is for the purchase or authorization for us to purchase the playground equipment for Pioneer Park that is currently began construction a few weeks ago. The contract we're being purchasing through is on state contract with Playworld Equipment. The vendor locally is Big T Recreation out of Draper. The purchase price is $300,000, which includes install and coordination with the general contractor for Pioneer Park.
Thank you for that report. Council, this is your opportunity to ask any clarifying or technical questions regarding staff report, but you don't have to. Hearing none, I'd welcome a motion.
Mayor, I'll make the motion that we approve the purchase of playground equipment from Big T Recreation for $300,000.
I'll second that.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Snell and a second by Councilmember Lee for approval as outlined. Each of you have up to 5 minutes to speak to this item if you'd like to take that opportunity. Would anyone like to take the opportunity? Hearing none, Councilmember Garn, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Thank you. The voting is unanimous. Thanks, Cole.
Thanks, Cole.
Next on our agenda is discussion of potential action on ordinance change regarding the city attorney. Mr. Scott, are you doing this?
Sure. Mayor, we had some discussion at the time of decision to go this route to hire a city attorney. In the interim, we never did really address how we wanted the city attorney to be hired, fired, and to whom this person should report. I think the effort tonight is to address that. We have an ordinance that's out there available. I think some people have looked at that and said that might be a good way to go. I think if you looked at the key change to this ordinance, it would be that in the performance of his or her duties, the city attorney would be under the supervision of the city manager, but the hiring and firing, that's right. The hiring and firing of this person would be initiated by the city manager, but would be under the auspice of the city governing body or city council. So, again, this is up for debate and can be changed in any way you'd like to see it changed.
Thank you for that report, Council. This is your opportunity to ask some technical questions, and I'll just start. Maybe it's more rhetorical than technical, but I just want to make sure I understand. So every other department head right now reports to the city manager, and the city manager hires department heads with the consent of the council, fires department heads on their own, on the city manager's action. In this case, then the city attorney would be hired by the city manager as took place, ratified by the council. But in the dismissal of a city attorney, in this case, the city manager could initiate that action, but the city attorney could not be terminated unless the council ratified that action as well.
That is correct.
That's really the only difference then is on the termination side. Thank you. Other technical questions? Councilmember Page?
No, I've been thinking about this, and I actually think this is a pretty good approach. But,
right now we're in question form, though.
Oh, no questions. I'm
Okay.
fine.
Councilmember Snell?
No, I know what they did.
I don't have any technical questions, no.
Councilmember Lee?
No.
Councilmember Adams?
Just clarifying question on your comment there, Mayor, so I'm clear and everybody's clear.
So did you say that the current policy is that the city council hires and fires department heads?
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, and then we don't fire department heads either, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Even a unanimous vote of this body cannot remove any department heads, correct? Is that correct?
Not to my knowledge, no. As I understand the ordinance, and our new city attorney can correct me because I'm sure he's well versed on all chapters at this point, and with the consent of the council. So if we hire a department head, city manager takes that action, the council at that point can say, no, we don't concur with that appointment. And if they don't concur at the point of hiring, then they don't have to be hired. When it comes to terminating, if I understand it correctly, the city manager also makes that initiation to terminate a department head, but that is not brought to the city council necessarily to terminate a department head. The city attorney in this case is not specifically named in our ordinance, and that's really the primary purpose of this ordinance being brought. It sounds like, based on a letter that we distributed to all of you from our previous city attorney, that ratification, the action that took place in appointing him, obviously makes sense. But if we were to attempt to terminate the city attorney, that could not happen without the council and the city manager's action together.
Okay, so for further clarification, so if the council were to not give their support to, per se, the manager in hiring a department head, could his authority still override that and move forward and hire or fire that individual?
Hiring, and maybe Mr. Mills wants to speak. I don't, probably not qualified to answer legal questions if that's what it is, but hiring a department head, as it's referenced in our ordinance right now, would not be allowed without the consent of the council. So if the city manager said, I want to hire a new parks director, let me rephrase that. When the city manager hired the parks director, he brought Cole Stevens' name to the council and said, this is who I recommend that we hire. The council unanimously concurred with that appointment. At that evening, if the council would have said, no, we don't think that's the right choice, then it would not have happened.
That's correct, Mayor Hyatt. That's in Kaysville City Code 244 sub 1 that says appoint subject to the approval of the governing body. So Mr. Scott can appoint people, but it's the offer is, I guess, conditional upon your approval, as the governing body. That is the same, as I read it, with the code that's before you this evening for the city attorney.
Thank you. Additional questions, Mr. Adams?
No. Thank you both.
Mr. Garn?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no additional technical questions, we would welcome a motion in some fashion, and then we'll have an opportunity to add comments.
I'll make a motion that we approve the change in the ordinance amending Title II, Chapter 5 of the Kaysville City Ordinance to clarify and define the provisions relating to the city attorney and providing for an effective date.
Second.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Snell for adoption as outlined. Council, you each have 5 minutes to speak to this item. We'll start with Councilmember Snell.
I won't be taking my full 5 minutes, Mayor, but I do want to just express that I think this Kaysville City has been growing over the last number of years, that everybody knows, and coming to the point where we've always had basically an attorney on hire or on retainer for their services, and I think we've gotten big enough to the point now where it's important to have a full-time city attorney represent the city in all things, plus to be able to have that the prosecution's side and those things as well. So, and I'm very, very encouraged. I know there was a lengthy and intense, I guess, but not the right word necessarily, but a lengthy and a good process that was set up to hire and interview the city attorney that we now have, and I'm excited to see Mr. Mills begin his service tonight. So, yeah, that's all I'll say.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity to. I'm just going to speak in support of what's been proposed tonight as I've reviewed the ordinance, and I think I can't remember where exactly I shared that perspective. It may have been in an email, but I have full faith and confidence in our city staff, including our city manager. I do think legal issues are a little bit different, and I had shared in a previous setting that I had the opportunity to serve as the president of an organization recently, and which necessitated some legal advice, and that attorney reported directly to the board, and I hope that it wouldn't have made a difference. They still would have given me their best legal opinion, but personally I think this is not any reflection on our current city manager, but just as a good practice in the future. I think it's. I do think the attorney's position is just a little bit different in that if you know that you can give your candid feedback, and it takes a little more than one person to get rid of you. I think that's probably a good department or a good department head to have some checks and balances on. So I support the revision as recommended. That's all I have, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, I am also supportive. I am so glad that the councils going forward will have you here. I can't tell you how many times as a council we came to an issue and we couldn't proceed without getting some help in that area at this council meeting. And so it's going to be great for us going forward having you here, and I'm glad this has been done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Adams?
Not a whole lot. It's it's just a new chapter of Kaysville, I guess. We're excited to have Mr. Nick Mills here. New chapter for all of us. New chapter going forward, I guess. And a great kudos to the existing council, who has been a great leg for the city to stand on for 30 years plus now, I believe. The only concern that I have has absolutely nothing to do with Mr. Mills. I find him to be a man of fine character. The only concern I have is just on policy side. For 18 months to 2 years now, I've strived to try and align our policies in more accordance with our surrounding cities and communities. They currently have policies that let the ability to appoint all appointed positions. That authority rests upon the entire council to appoint, to hire or fire at will employees, which are all the appointed positions, which are department heads, manager. Right on, Nick. Right on cue. Wow. Let's keep it going. Turn it up. Can you give us some amplification of that there?
That's one we're going to remember.
Yeah. Where's IT when he needs them? Crap. Turn it off.
Throw it down real hard.
I apologize.
$10 says your wife is at home right now and just triggered that on your thing to embarrass you. Good. No worries, Nick. No, mine is more from a standpoint of policy to bring us more in accordance with other cities, and I believe that will bring us to a higher standard in Kaysville of responsibility and a higher check and balance system as we go forward into growing into a bigger city. Farmington, Fruit Heights, Centerville, and others all have their policy formed that way, that appointed positions, at-will appointed positions, they work at the pleasure and the will of your entire elected body, not just your city manager. So if there is an issue that really gets so big, and per se you have a manager that has been here for 35 plus years and has relationships that are grown this tight and woven together, I get that. That's a very difficult position for anyone to be into, to take an authoritarian role that might affect an individual's life in a disciplinary role. That, to me, is the beauty and the wisdom behind shifting our policy into that direction instead of leaving it in the hands of one man. No offense against Shane. He's only been here 2 years. I hope that he's not, ultimately that tight with all his department heads. But we've seen that before in Kaysville. And there's some historical ramifications and truths to this, and I think that that will help prohibit that as Kaysville goes forward. So nothing against Nick. I just wish and hope that going forward there'll be more interaction from the residents. It's ultimately you guys who decide where our policies and ordinances go, and hopefully we do listen to you and change that. But I hope you'll think about the wisdom in that, in changing the direction of that to where it's your elected body that really has the authority over the city. So,
thank you. Councilmember Garn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I agree with most of the comments that have been made already, so I don't want to repeat those. I like the way this is written because it provides, I think, a check and balance where, especially for the city attorney, as you put so eloquently, Mayor Hyatt and Councilmember Snell, Councilmember Lee. So I won't repeat that, but I'm in support of that. I would be, you know, it's interesting, you can, to what Councilmember Adams just mentioned, there's a lot of ways that you can organize people working together, either in government or private sector. The private sector model typically is you have a board of directors that does have responsibility that can hire and fire the CEO. Typically, the CEO, however, then hires and fires all people under him, and that's the typical private model. It's very efficient. It sort of pushes decision-making down to the lower levels. It doesn't mean it has to be done that way in government. A few years ago, I'm not sure exactly, maybe 30 years ago, that was predominant in Utah, where there was more of this sort of company-private type of model for government as well. Works pretty efficiently. But in fact, there are some cities that probably, as Councilmember Adams mentioned, do have a little more authority for the city council. I personally don't like too much authority. I like both bodies, the separation of powers. That's maybe not the right word, but a little check and balance, especially for the city attorney, where neither body can do it unilaterally and both have to opine. And even in the appointment of new department heads who are not the city attorney, that still requires a ratification of the city council. So I'm very satisfied with that and think it works well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Page.
Yeah, I agree also. Being the last one, I guess that's a disadvantage in some ways, but I agree with what's being said, and I think that this creates a wonderful balance that will help the process. I don't like the idea of a lot of times where I think that the business of the city should be run by the people in the city. And I'm always concerned when perception-wise or otherwise that perhaps others may think that they have an ability to run the city or the processes of the city, and I just don't think that that's the way it should be, and we should leave that. But it gives some say to the council to be able to make sure there's a balance there as well. That's it.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second as outlined currently. At this point, I'll call for a vote. Councilmember Adams?
Just a point of formality, not you, Nick. Nay.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries 4-1. Thank you, everyone. Next item on our agenda is final plat approval for Sunset Equestrian Estates Phases 16A and 19 at approximately 1950 South Zenyatta Way. Mr. Thompson.
I think we're fairly familiar with Sunset Equestrian Estates. This is nearly the last phases. You can see there on the east side and highlighted on the map. These two plats are very much in. I can never tell if that's my eyes or the focus on the screen.
That's better.
Thank you. They're very much in compliance with the preliminary plats which have been submitted in the past. Phase 16A is the piece along the extension of Zenyatta Way across the east edge of the property. Leaves us a little area here where a future cul-de-sac is planned for. Plats very similar to the preliminary plat, which has been approved for some time. And then phase 19, earlier this year, this little piece on the north end of the property was zoned R1LD, and you may recall that recently we amended the development agreement to provide the stub road so this could be incorporated. This again is very much in compliance with the preliminary plat. We look at the overall preliminary plat of the development. It's phase 16A is across here with the cul-de-sac on the end. The only phase remaining on Sunset Equestrian is this small cul-de-sac here. So again, this was reviewed. It's in compliance with the plats and applicable ordinances, and the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval of these two plats for final plat approval.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Opportunity for technical questions, and I have one. Will you just go back one slide? Maybe one more, and one more. I guess that's three. I'm just trying to recall, I think we required this pedestrian, or maybe it was volunteered by the developer, this access to get to the junior high school so these neighbors had a safe route. When we originally did that, was it just an L Street here? I'm trying to think of why we wouldn't have thought about doing that where a little closer, direct to the school. This wasn't initially planned, is that what it was?
That's correct. The initial plan had this as just a 90-degree corner.
Okay. So that's, but this access is currently...
That's essentially installed. I don't know if the pavement's down, but the rest of the improvements are pretty well there now.
Okay. Other technical questions, Councilmember Lee?
Yes, Mayor,
Yes.
I didn't have one, but after your question, I do have one.
Sorry.
There's what, only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots that are there that may not have been there had the cul-de-sac not been, if we didn't approve this final plat. I'm just wondering if there was any discussion or thought that maybe for those 6, rather than make them walk all the way around to the school, have a second access point, but maybe for only 6 lots. I don't know, I'm a little ambivalent on that, I guess, to even know if, I would think probably at least one of those houses or more might have some junior high students going forward, but, and that would be my, I guess, question for staff. That probably wasn't discussed, I guess, or because you already had the access point.
That was not discussed when the preliminary plat was reviewed. This is the preliminary plat that was approved some time ago. I don't know if there'd be strong objection to it, but has not been discussed at this point.
Thank you.
Any other technical questions, clarifying questions? I'd welcome a motion.
Well, I'll move that we approve the Sunset Equestrian Estates plot 16A and 19 final plat.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Page and a second by Councilmember Garn for approval as outlined. Council, you each have up to 5 minutes to speak to this item. I'll start this time, and I just do have one just to that comment that was made about that connection. Ideally, I think this functions just fine. I understand there's a paved trail that goes around the school, so that at least that does give access to the folks. You know, in a perfect world, if we would have known this was coming, that might have been a better place for it. But to Councilmember Garn's point of being discussed, that becomes kind of how many different access do you provide? And at least I'm glad we do have one, but you know, we did, I think, talk about trying to, when this road just elbowed, we talked about trying to put them in between some of these lines, but of course they just led to an empty field that wouldn't have done anything, and that's why this location was determined. But things change, things evolve, and I think this is still a good layout. Councilmember Adams, do you have any comments?
No.
Councilmember Garn?
No comments.
Councilmember Page?
No.
Councilmember Snell?
I do not have any comments either.
Okay. All right. We do have a motion and a second. Councilmember Snell, will you start a vote?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries 4-0. Councilmember Lee has stepped out. Next on our agenda is final plat approval for the Bob Mason subdivision at 860 South Roche Lane. Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Mason owns the property outlined in yellow down on Roche Lane near Angel Street. He would like to split off a couple additional building lots. We rezoned this property recently to the RA zone to accommodate this. Reviewed the preliminary plat. He'd like to put a private lane in to access the 3 lots. So he's got a large outbuilding barn on this building. He'd like to create the 2 more, use the existing driveway, convert that and bring it up to private lane standards. Since the preliminary plat, he has added the standard turnaround at the end. The one thing that's a little odd is typically roads go down the side of a lot. Again, trying to use the existing driveway that's there. This lot 1, I believe, this front lot is bisected by the private lane. We have verified that there is buildable area on either side of that lane, meeting all setback requirements, so it is still a buildable lot. It's a little strange, but it's acceptable. Again, this was reviewed by the Planning Commission and recommended for approval.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the council?
Go ahead.
Just a question. What was the reasoning behind keeping the driveway down the middle of the lot 1, is it, instead of moving it over?
Mr. Mason owned all the property, owns all the property. He built this barn in the back, has a concrete driveway accessing that barn. He would like to keep that, widen it to the required width for a private lane rather than tearing all this out and putting just a separate roadway in. So that's at his request.
Okay, just was curious.
Councilor Adams?
Was the cul-de-sac by his choice, or was it required by us, or?
We required him to meet the minimum turnaround requirements.
What is that minimum turnaround requirement?
That would be a 40-foot radius if it's a cul-de-sac. We gave him the option to incorporate the driveway into his barn into that. He elected to do it as shown on the final plat with the turnaround.
Is it a 40-foot radius from lip of gutter or 40-foot radius from property?
In this case, it would be the same since it's a private road.
But I'm speaking to our code.
Our code requires on a public right-of-way a 50-foot radius to property, which that gives 40-foot radius to the back of curb.
So we required this gentleman, so the cul-de-sac's required why?
For turnaround purposes, for emergency and other vehicles.
Okay. How many feet from Roche Lane to the cul-de-sac?
In this case, it's about 250 feet, as I recall.
Okay. Is that policy that is always is just a blanket policy? We always require that?
We always require a turnaround, yes, of some nature.
Okay. So when you say of some nature, is there different turnaround apparatuses that can be used?
Yes. We've allowed hammerheads. We've allowed, like I mentioned, people to incorporate it into their driveways. If they deviate from this standard, it's reviewed by the fire department to make sure that their equipment and other things are, that the turnaround accommodates that equipment.
Okay. So the standard, just for my clarity, is 150 feet distance. If you exceed 150 feet, you got to have an approved International Fire Code turnaround.
Not exactly. Our ordinance says that if a road, any permanent cul-de-sac requires a turnaround on the end of it. If it's a temporary situation, there's some other criteria applied.
Okay, so any permanent roadway needs a conforming fire truck turnaround.
Any permanent cul-de-sac road.
Any permanent roadway.
Yes.
Beyond 150 feet away from the next roadway any dead end per se that exceeds 150 feet, right, needs a turnaround apparatus.
No, our ordinance does not refer to 150 feet anywhere in our ordinance. It says that if it's a permanent cul-de-sac, you put in the turnaround. If it's a temporary dead end, a stub road that could be extended in the future, it says if it exceeds one lot in depth, then there has to be a turnaround area provided.
A permanent cul-de-sac would be a turnaround, correct?
Yes.
So that's
what applies here.
Okay, so once again, for clarity, the fire code reads 150 feet. Our code reads the depth of one home, right? Anything past one lot?
Our code says a permanent cul-de-sac dead-end road that will be permanent requires a turnaround area. If it's a temporary stub road, which is also temporarily a dead end, then it says if it exceeds one lot deep off the next intersection, then it has to have a turnaround area provided.
What is the maximum length of roadway that you can have with a cul-de-sac at the end?
With a cul-de-sac at the end is 600 feet, according to our ordinance.
Thank you.
Councilmember Garn?
Yeah, the only question I have is on Lot 3, where it is divided kind of in the middle by the driveway, if the property owner wanted to put a house on either side of the road on each buildable lot, he would actually have to subdivide that, right, and come before the body again.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Page?
No questions.
Councilmember Snell?
No questions.
I will welcome a motion.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the final plat approval for Bob Mason subdivision.
I'll second that.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Page for approval as outlined. Council, you each have 5 minutes to speak to this item, and we'll start with Councilmember Page. Let's see. No, we'll start with Councilmember Lee.
No, I don't have any comments.
Councilmember Adams?
So this particular cul-de-sac does, in fact, meet turnaround requirement?
Yes, sir.
A 40-foot radius meets our standard?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. In comment, all I have to say is I appreciate whoever this developer is for going to the extent of putting a cul-de-sac in, and furthermore, for meeting the International Fire Code. I don't know if he's here tonight, but I appreciate that he's gone to the extent and cost of doing that. It is not always the case in the city.
Thank you. Councilmember Garn?
No comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Page?
No comment.
Councilmember Snell?
Nope.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. We'll call for a vote. Councilmember Page?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Voting is unanimous. Next item on our agenda is final plat and PRUD overlay zone approval for the Whisper Hollow subdivision, previously reviewed as the Whisperwood subdivision at 650 East, 100 North. Mr. Thompson.
I believe the last meeting, the council reviewed this subdivision located at the top of 100 North. It's outlined here. Sorry, I'm on the wrong Whisper. This plat has been reviewed previously, still in the same place, sorry. This has been approved preliminary plat some time ago. There's been several issues raised by the adjacent property owners concerning this subdivision. The engineering and the developer have gone through and tried to address those items. Items were outlined specifically in the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting, which were included in the packet. They listed 5 conditions with the preliminary plat approval. The issues regarded access to the property to the east with the vacation of the piece of right-of-way that existed, stormwater in the area, privacy for the property adjacent to the new private road, and concerns with the stability of the soil. There's been effort performed on all those ends. There is one difference from the preliminary plat. Just quickly, the preliminary plat looked essentially like this with lots configured. They had an access to the property to the east, shown on the very north end of the property. That access has now been shifted down one lot. So there's a lot on the very north end, and then the access that comes through the middle. That access this property more in the center. It also accommodates the utilities in the area a little bit better. Other than that, the plat's the same. So that's how they've addressed the access to the property to the east. Stormwater, they've done several stormwater studies. Included a detention basin on the east end of this lot. They showed piping. The calculations indicate that this meets the city requirements for all stormwater runoff in this area, with a little bit of extra to spare. The privacy concerns, developer has indicated on the plan is that he would build a retaining wall to adjust for the grades. He's willing to put a fence across the top of that retaining wall that would match the neighbor's existing fence, and plant some vegetation along that area as well. A geotechnical report was submitted. It showed that the ground was stable, had about a foot of topsoil on top, which is fairly common, and below that it was the same type of soil we see throughout most of town. Planning Commission has reviewed this. They felt like those conditions had been met, and they've recommended plat approval for this subdivision.
Thank you. Council, your opportunity to ask clarifying or technical questions. I'm always happy to start.
I've got one.
Okay.
It's for our city attorney, Nick.
Yep.
Mr. Mills, if you wouldn't mind. There's an active legal appeal on this right now. Are we at liberty to be doing what we're doing here, Mr. Mills?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the city got a notice of appeal this afternoon on this matter. I don't think that's a reason to hold it up. The appeal was based on the Planning Commission's recommendation, so that's not a final order of the city. So the City Council should proceed forward this evening, and then the person that appealed the decision would have any remedies, but there's nothing at this point for them to appeal. It's merely a recommendation from the Planning Commission.
So is it a waste of time, Nick, to appeal a Planning Commission decision then? Why is that even in the law?
I don't know why. It is a waste of time to appeal a Planning Commission decision.
Could you state
if it's
it
a
more
recommendation? Clearly? Yeah, so the Planning Commission acts in two ways. The Planning Commission has authority delegated from the City Council to approve certain things. For example, a conditional use permit. If they have approved something and it's a final decision, then it's a valid appeal. The Planning Commission also acts as a recommending body. When they act as a recommending body, it's really very similar to if the city engineer says city staff recommends that we approve this item. So it's as though, I guess in this situation, it's as though when Andy said this should be approved, somebody said, stop, I appeal that. Well, there's been no action taken. So there's nothing in this situation to appeal.
Okay, thank you. What I was asking you to state more clearly, because it was kind of mumbled on the mics, is that it is a waste of time and you don't know why it's in the law to even appeal a Planning Commission decision.
That's not correct.
Okay.
So when the Planning Commission acts as final approval body, then a appeal is appropriate. When the Planning Commission acts as a recommending body, appeal is not appropriate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Garn?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a question regarding, I know when this issue came up before the changes to the plat, there was an appeal at that time, and quite frankly, and it's curious because Kaysville's been around since, what, 1857, 67, something like that, as an incorporated city?
1868.
68, thank you. So, and apparently we've never had an appeal of land use decision in all that time. So we didn't really have a formal body for that appeal to go to, and it makes no sense for the appeal to go right back to the body that made the decision. And I guess my question is, have we made any progress in putting an appeal body into place?
Maybe I'm the most appropriate person to talk about that. Actually, Nick and I spoke about that this afternoon, and one of the things we've talked about a couple of times is what's the best method to have it for an appeal authority in your city. We talked about a couple of different options, and we'll be presenting those to the city council soon. But the district court serves as a kind of a catch-all appeal body as well for any kind of administrative decision that a council or anyone else makes as well. So if the planning commission made an administrative decision, the city council could hear that as an appeal. If they held that decision up, the appellant could then go to district court and appeal that as well. But in this case, am I saying all that right? Maybe I shouldn't talk, but as far as the history of Kaysville, we are looking at putting something else together for an appeal that would be probably not the city council in that regard.
Thank you. I guess that makes my follow-up question a little bit of a moot point, but there is an appeal body, which is district court, but we'd like to be more friendly than that and put in place a Kaysville-specific appeal body that would be more of an administrative appeal, and then the court option, assuming the parties didn't like the appeal body's decision, could still avail themselves of court as well.
Absolutely.
That's correct. Yeah.
And I think another thing, just for your information, that we talked about was, are we also making the appropriate decisions at the appropriate levels? Should the city council be making a final plat approval? That's something that maybe just school for thought. We will probably make some recommendations coming from both planning commission and staff about maybe changing a few of those things up, which might facilitate this whole process as well.
Thank you.
Is the council the appeals body for the planning commission?
On administrative issues, yes. Well, for any administrative decision in the city.
Oh, yeah, so any planning commission appeal comes to us. We're the appeal body for the planning commission. Anything they do, if there's an appeal there, we are the appeals body.
Does anything, do they make some legislative decisions, don't they? You have to make a distinction between the administrative decisions the city makes and the legislative decisions the city makes to see which route the appeal takes.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm not familiar enough with the code to say definitively all appeals.
It was rhetorical, I believe it is. Was this appeal filed within the legal time frame?
Yes. It's 10 days.
Okay. Mr. Thompson, you mentioned in your report to us, I was a little unclear on it. Did you say that the detention basin has room to spare? Is that what you're saying?
Based on their calculations, they exceed the 10-year storm that's required by our ordinance to the volume in the detention basin.
Councilmember Page?
No questions.
Councilmember Snow?
Just to follow up, I guess, on the appeals question that Mr. Garn was referring to, there was an active appeal of the council provided the council made a decision, right, a preliminary plat approval in June, I guess it was, and they appealed within the 10-day limit. What happened with that appeal? I know that we didn't have a formal appeals process, so is that not an active appeal, or what happens with that?
Specifically in that instance, what happened was we were kind of in a little loop there with not having that appeal authority in place. We did mention that district court was an option. Also, our legal opinion at the time from our legal services from our counsel was that plat, that preliminary plat, was also not appealable. It was similar in nature to not being a final decision. That may be up for some debate. I don't have an opinion myself on that, but
because it was a preliminary,
right?
Not a final plat.
Exactly. That was the discussion at that point. But regardless of that, we still feel like it's important that we provide an appeals method. And I think Councilmember Garn articulated it well, that it would be nice to have something to not just tell everybody go to district court. Yeah.
Okay. That's all I got, Mayor.
Councilor Lee?
No, everything I thought of has been asked.
Thank you, Council. At this point, I welcome a motion. That's just not a public hearing, so... I'm sorry, who do you... Excuse me, sir, I haven't recognized you to speak. Who do you represent?
Okay. I'm with Alan Bachman with Fletcher Simonson, Booth and Jenkins. I'm here representing Matt and Valerie Briggs. And there was concern about the appellate process, and I received an email from Felshaw King on August 29th of this year, 2017, of course. And in that email, he said that the way this process was proceeding, your concerns would be heard by the staff, the Planning Commission, and then finally, at the final plat proceeding of the City Council, that our concerns would be addressed then. And then he said, if your concerns are not satisfied at the City Council meeting, then you can take that appeal to the district court, which we intend to do. But we would like to have our due process rights, which involves the vacation of a road which was delayed until the final plat decision, and our reliance on the email from Felshaw King that the neighbors have been relying upon to be able to address the City Council. And not only, may it affect what you do, but it would help you produce, I think, probably a proper order, which may even help you when it is appealed. Maybe that doesn't even help us. I don't know. It depends what you decide. But I'm concerned about the process because we were promised that in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mills, I can't recall the details of what conversations, but the comment was just raised by the gentleman. We did have provided an opportunity for feedback. We have received emails from property owners. I think I've spoken on my position on this particular piece of property. But that aside, as far as process goes, are we leaving out any steps or forgetting to take some appropriate steps that should otherwise be provided? I think that was partially to Mr. Adams' question earlier.
So, as recognizing that I just started Monday, as I've reviewed what's happened and I've spoken with staff, it doesn't appear that the city has missed any steps. I have not seen the email that Mr. Adams referenced from Mr. King, but the city hasn't missed any steps.
Okay. So I guess the question then tonight for the council, and we're in the process, I gather, of someone making a motion and then providing the council opportunity to give additional feedback. But one of those motions could be to table the item and to seek further feedback or comment. But that would be per our rules of order for the meeting, up to the council and the motion maker.
Are we still in question format?
We can be. If you have another follow-up question.
Were all parties involved that the first appeal and now the second appeal basically just smoke, like it was worthless? Did we inform them back? Your first appeal is nothing. Were they informed rightfully with that? And the second appeal today, since they were within their legal 10-day window of time, were they informed today that appeal's no good either. Are we doing our due diligence? Are we doing our due process? I'll just stop there. Were they informed?
My understanding is that the preliminary plat appeal was, they were informed that that was deemed not a final decision of the city council, and so they were aware of that. We spoke today to
Yes.
We spoke today to Mr. Farr briefly about the issue. I don't know that we told him that we were going to proceed. At one point during our Andy and I's meeting with him, he said, I anticipate the city will proceed tonight. And based on that, I don't know that either Andy or I felt like we needed to address the situation more.
And I would like to just answer maybe from my perspective from conversations that I've had, but I believe the attorney representing a couple of the neighbors did have a conversation, as I understood it, with our city attorney. I do think there is another neighbor, the Taylors, that maybe initially were not represented by council who had also filed notice, and I don't know that we ever provided formal response, but I don't know if their appeal was formal either, so I just wanted to speak to that.
And just, Mayor, just for clarity of the record, the Taylors and the Tices were both represented by Mr. Farr, who we spoke to. At least that was my understanding of our meeting.
Thank you. That helps. All right, Council, would someone like to make a motion?
One more follow-up question, Mayor.
Okay.
Sorry, and this is on more of a technical nature on the plat itself. Andy, maybe this is a question for you with regard to the swapping of Lot 1, the location of Lot 1, and the access to the property to the east. It's now on the plat. It's indicated as Parcel 1.
Yes.
Is there? Can you describe the technical nature? Is there a concern, or does that allow improved access to the property to the east? Is there a technical advantage to doing it that way over the preliminary plat, which had it at the north end of the property?
This does a couple things. There was concern that with the property access to the north, that didn't provide good access to all the property in the back. There's also utility-wise, there's an existing Hate Creek irrigation line that runs down this area. It could be relocated, but Hate Creek is reluctant on that. And what it does is it's sized at 36 feet wide, which would provide for or meet minimum requirements for a double flag lot, which would give them the ability to plat their property into 2 lots. If that was at the end, then you're splitting the property at odd angles. So it appears to be better both for the people to the east, the Briggses, and for this current development in this location.
Okay, thank you.
In the future, it's located or identified as Parcel 1. It would then be platted with the property to the east at such time as they choose to develop that property.
Thank you. Would you also show a significant concern in the area is the drainage, the flooding? Can you show what this plat, this final plat, is now showing in terms of drainage?
There's several elements. Currently, there's a low spot on the property in this area. A drain over here that collects water. It was piped a couple years ago. Before that, it was open. Water would come down a ditch, would go into that drain. Occasionally, that drain would either plug or, whatever reason, water would begin to impound back in the low area. And then it would filter over this way. There was stuff when this lot was developed, there was a pipe placed through there to try to bypass that. When we found that didn't work, we took this developer's warranty money and put in another catch basin, did a little bit of curb work, so that if this primary drain plugged or exceeded capacity for whatever reason, It could be impounded on the property within the berm that we built and then ultimately overflow into a second storm drain pipe that went through there. With this property being raised up, that hole will go away. This west edge of the property will be made higher so that it drains away from that property. So surface drainage will go into the private lane, will be collected in catch basins. If it exceeds capacity of what they're allowed, it will go into a detention basin. That basin was signed to collect all the runoff on this property as well as the property to the east within the drainage basin. They also were asked and have provided, they surveyed the basin that we had built, and they added that much capacity to their basin as well. So it would handle all the water that was being collected in the past, plus all the new water that may be generated in the future. And that's how it was sized. They've also included some overflow, so if that basin exceeds capacity, or if the new inlet where the open ditch goes into the pipe becomes plugged or exceeds capacity for whatever reason, it will go down a low area into another catch basin at the bottom here, or if the basin spills, it would spill into that catch basin, into the pipe where the water was previously restricted, and allow it to be carried away.
Thank you.
Council, at this point, I'd welcome a motion, some fashion.
I'll move for a final plat. And
just before we do the motion,
sorry.
If he wants to retract, he can. You want to wait and hear his comment first? We're in the middle of the motion. Thank you.
I just need to point out that this is final plat and also the PRU overlay zone. Our ordinance says that a PRUD, which is required for the private lane, is done after final plat approval. So either include it in this motion or a second motion to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Garn.
I'll move for final plat and PRUD overlay zone for the Whisper Hollow subdivision at 650 East, 100 North.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. There's a motion by Councilmember Garn and a second by Councilmember Page for approval as outlined. Council, you each have up to 5 minutes to speak to this agenda item. We'll start with Mr. Garn. Oh, actually, thank you for reminding me of that. As the developer, we didn't give you the opportunity to speak to the council if you would like to. Thank you for that reminder.
Thank you. We appreciate you meeting tonight, especially so close to Christmas.
Doesn't have to.
Okay.
Just a candid answer, sir. Councilmember Adams. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. Tonight, as you are aware, we're reviewing the technical compliance with the requirements given to us by the Planning Commission and the City Council. We are complying with all state statutes and city codes and city ordinances. We are here to confirm and the recommendation of the engineer that we have met all of the requests by them. As you can see from what has been said tonight, we've made great efforts to come to agreement with the neighbors, and it would appear that no matter what we do, we're not able to do that. One thing that is not shown on the plat is that there would be cross-access easement at the beginning of the private drive and through the through the flag lot access, so that there's, and we had always intended that. In fact, on the preliminary plat, the original 30-foot access said 30-foot access, and we had planned on that. We actually have to have, and it's required, we need to have that if we ever need to service anything on the detention basin, which is a private detention basin maintained by the homeowners association. We would have to have cross-access easement to do that, as well as to service any of the piping that goes to that. So that's part of what would be added, and of course to that we are in a conundrum. The property owner to the east, we were in negotiations from September through October, 4 different meetings. They declined to attend the 5th meeting. Today, or beginning Tuesday and through today, we've been in negotiations with them. It was determined that we were giving all of the property, the 36 feet, to that, but they declined to agree because they did not want us to have cross-access easement on the 36 feet, which we need that for not only, as I mentioned, the maintenance, but the properties on either side have been somewhat compromised. They're still within code, and we would like to have those property owners have the option of doing a side access garage so that there's a prettier, if that's the term, entrance into the home. If we're going to be fought on every hand, no matter what we do, we hired 4 engineers on this property to get to the engineering. My partner is an engineer, registered in almost every state, and he approved it. And then, of course, the one that's most important is Mr. Thompson's approval, and we've come to that. But if we're going to be fought on every hand, the question is, with the 36-foot access, should we be going back to the 30-foot access that was originally approved? The homeowner to the east does not have sufficient land currently to do any lot. If we did 30 feet, he could still do 1 lot. If we do the 36, he can do 2 lots. But as I mentioned, no matter what we come back with and try to offer, it is not sufficient. And it looks like both the east and the west property owners are continuing with, I guess you'd call it litigation on it, to oppose us and to stop the development. So we would like to add those access easements. We would like to go to 30 feet rather than 36 feet, but we will comply with whatever motion is made and accepted by the council. We will do that. We just have reached a point where we're more than frustrated and have given away a lot of, well, the property itself is worth a lot of money, but a lot of things to try to acquiesce. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Council, we currently have a motion and a second and would provide an opportunity for comment. Mr. Adams, we'll start with you.
I think we're going to start over there with Mr. Snell.
Can we try to make an amended motion at this point?
You can.
Just would like to amend the motion the same as outlined before final plat and PRUD overlay zone for the Whisper Hollow subdivision with the change to the 30-foot easement.
Okay, thank you. We have a substitute motion as outlined. Is there a second to the substitute motion adding that clarification for the easement?
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a substitute motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Snell as outlined. Council, now your opportunity will speak to the motion. And you're right, we were at Councilmember Garn.
Okay, so we're speaking to the substitute motion at this point. Yeah, I don't know, I'm somewhat ambivalent on this. I feel like, I have a fairly good understanding after this our third meeting or fourth meeting in three planning commission meetings. It was probably the longest land use decision I made in either the planning commission or the city council. But with this change to 30 feet versus 36 feet, I'm not sure what that impacts, and I'm wondering if I can ask a question at this point. What does that mean substantively, maybe from an engineering standpoint, utility corridors, access? Does that have any negative impact on adjoining property owners or the access to the property owner to the east being able to develop his 2 lots?
As was mentioned, that would largely restrict the Briggs property to the east to only be able to develop 1 lot under a flag lot provision. There may be another alternative, but that's kind of the basis we've been going on. As you know, it adds 3 feet of width to those 2 abutting lots, lots 1 and 2.
And the opposite, if it stays at 36 feet, what is the detriment to the developer with that, or the applicant?
3 feet on those 2 lots, each of them. That's.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may have a moment, what's before the council tonight is this final plat. This is what's been noticed to the public, and this is what's before the council for approval. So I don't think that at this point that because it involves shortening a public utility drainage easement, which would involve a public property interest right, I don't think that that is an appropriate motion because it hasn't been noticed.
Okay, then I'll withdraw my motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Still yours.
So now we're back to the original motion. And I guess that's what I feel most comfortable with, the original motion. I feel like this is just my assessment for what it's worth as one vote on the council, that there has been a lot of study, a lot of engineering reports, geotechnical studies, all these things to determine the primary concerns. It seems like one of the concerns, at least in my mind, that the access to the property to the east and the concerns with the access being closer to the hill and the drainage area to, I guess, the north has been addressed. So that's one issue I think that's been approved. It's a new one, and I understand, while not an attorney, I understand from a layman's perspective, the legal issue that because the Planning Commission action was a recommendation, not a final action, that it would actually be this final action then that would be appealed. I'm strongly in favor of an appeal process, even though it may differ from what my assessment and vote is. But I strongly favor the ability to do that, but it seems like it would be more appropriate after the matter is decided with some finality, and I get the preliminary plat thing as well. And then maybe the issues, I did read the email that was sent this afternoon, which did challenge some of the, with a different expert opinion, I guess, and looking at some of the flooding issues. And I won't go into that now, but it seems like that would be something that could be addressed in the appeal. But for now, we have to make a decision, and I would be in favor of approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Page.
Yeah, to me, the thing that we should be talking about is when the preliminary plat was approved, there was 5 conditions put upon that by the Planning Commission and agreed upon by the City Council, which is number 1, before requesting final plat approval, access to the Briggs property being resolved. I believe that has been. In fact, even more so, it's given him the opportunity to develop 2 lots on his property. Stormwater problems be addressed. I know that's a concern, but there's been engineers looked at this, and the liability will be upon those engineering firms if it's not addressed, and if they do have water problems. The buck will stop with them. Privacy concerns be, number 3, privacy concerns be addressed along the western property line, and I know that It deals with, a retaining wall, privacy fence, etc. I believe that that's been addressed and even agreed upon to plant trees on that as well. Work with the staff to determine if a geotechnical report is needed. That's been taken care of, and a report was issued and accomplished. And then lot number 6, number 5, lot number 6 not to be included in the PUD overlay zone, which it was eliminated. I guess the question before us is, and it should be the only question before us, according to the agenda, is have these conditions been met on the preliminary plat so the final plat can be approved or not? And I guess that's what's before us. I personally feel they have been.
Thank you. Councilmember Snell?
I don't have a whole lot to add. I do like that with the final plat, the change that has been made with moving lot 1 to the north of the property and allowing the access to go up, to continue up to the Briggs property to the east through the center between lot 1 and lot 2. I think that's an improvement on the design, and I think it's the Briggs are the beneficiaries of that change in the format. I agree with Mr. Page. I think the concerns and the stipulations that had been made on the design in the preliminary plat as well as at the Planning Commission level have been met. I think that having the road, the private drive, and the cul-de-sac on the western side of all the lots improves and means that all those lots are now going to drain to a street and will evacuate. I think that actually is going to improve the drainage in the area, and anyway, I think that all around it's actually a better design tonight than what we saw a number of months ago. So I am in support of it.
Thank you. I'll take just a moment to speak to the item as well. I think this has been a pretty long process and pretty not always pleasant and exciting. I actually appreciate what Councilmember Page said a minute ago on asking those 5 questions. I do think that's the root of what the council needs to discuss, and even if we don't always agree, that is the on the outcome. That is the process. But this chain of events has also brought to light some other processes that I think that we've even just talked a little bit tonight in regards to this agenda item, and that is appealing and who appeals and appeals to what and how that process is addressed. The lion's share of these kind of issues, it seems like when the City Council, I don't know that in the last 150 years we've never had a land use appeal. I don't know that that's the case. However, we have delegated certain land use decisions, as Mr. Mills indicated, like conditional use permits, to the Planning Commission. They are the body that makes that determination. So when they make an appeal, it comes to the City Council. And I'm certainly not going to spout off state code as if I understand it, but I think one of the issues that we had here is that it dictates that we should have an appeal body, but that we shall provide one, but that body also can't be the same person who heard it in the first place. So the City Council can't appeal our own decision. In this case, the City Planning Commission was simply recommending the City Council at the end of the day makes the decision. When the future council does have that discussion on appeal body, I for one hope you do not delegate all of your land use authority to a body, because especially as it relates to conditional use permits, it's nice to be able to at least have the buck stop with the elected officials somewhere. I can't imagine a situation where we say, hey, sorry, the Planning Commission made that decision, we've delegated all of our authority to them, your next stop is district court. And so or if you do delegate all of your land use authority to the Planning Commission, then keep yourself as the appeal body, but not I would hate to see both. But in this regard, it's been a tough situation. I expressed some of the concerns before about access. I do appreciate the efforts that have been made. But it's been a tough one. But that's probably just the biggest thing I wanted to since we talked about the process, is when you revisit that process,
let's make sure you keep the elected body at least accountable to some degree. Councilor Lee.
Yeah. I also echo what Mayor Hyatt said. I am a big advocate that those who make the decisions should be the elected body. And it's frustrating because in the national level, there's so much of it that's passed on to unelected bureaucrats. And so it feels good that we get to do that here locally with the elected officials. With that being said, with this whole process on this particular agenda item, it has been a very, very long process, and I really appreciate the patience that especially the developer has had as we've gone through this to make sure we get it right, and that those who are involved have a fair chance to work with the developer. As far as I can tell, the developer has made an effort to sit down and try and work out differences, and it's so appreciative that that is the case. And you know, whether or not it's agreed upon at the end of the day, I do appreciate that you have made that effort. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lee. Councilor Adams.
Oh, I agree. Be held accountable, we will. And I hope everyone on all issues tonight holds us accountable. I have some disagreements on what has been said. And that doesn't stem from a personal nature to any one individual on any side of this. It stems from growing up as with a father who's a developer and watching him go through much more difficult processes than this. I've seen cities, the city where Nick came from. Nick's seen them, right? We've seen punch lists out of Layton City's engineering department that are 120 bullet items long. That's one punch list. Then the developer comes back 3 months later, having worked on it, he gets another one, 60 bullet items. I haven't even seen a bullet punch list given to this developer by our engineering department to work on. So I get incensed hearing how difficult this process has been. I hear developers come to me all the time. I won't name who they are, because that's the industry I come from. Dave, it was so easy getting my development through your city. Don't you dare say a word about it, though. On their end, right? They don't want it to be tough. The problem is we get ourselves into these predicaments of flooding issues, which historically I can prove them. I won't labor you with that tonight. But we get ourselves into these flooding issues. We've heard Councilmember Page tonight testify that if there are flooding issues, it will be on your engineer, which perhaps, but guess what? It'll be on our engineer too, which will be on the city, which will cost the taxpayers money. Case in point, Sunset Equestrian Estates, 12 homes flooding.
You got to keep on this item, Councilman Adams.
I am on the item.
That's
I'm
not
speaking to
applicable
flooding. I would disagree. So if you're okay with marching us down the road into flooding issues, let me get right into it, folks. The storm drain on this project, okay, I'd like to read from the geostrata, from the geotechnical report with a date of December 4th, 2017. We heard testimony here tonight that the folks were promised after their last planning commission meeting that they would receive these documents. And if you look at those dates, I believe that meeting was held on December 1st or November 30th, 31st. And they were promised they'd receive this document that night. They said, we'll have it to you today or tomorrow. Well, this document bears a date of December 4th. It wasn't even created at that time. Now, to get into the document, under the design criteria, it says, and this is the geostrata, which would be your geotechnical engineer, he states, since more specific criteria are needed, I spoke with officials at Kaysville City and was given the most salient advice by Andy Thompson, city engineer. Keep in mind, I'm reading verbatim here. The guidance he offered is summarized below. At minimum, conveyances, piping, should be designed to carry flow from a 10-year storm event. Storm drain pipe must be at least 15 inches in diameter. Can I get some explanation why the piping is designed at 12 inches in diameter?
Would you like me to answer that, Mayor?
Take it off of my time if we do, please.
Yes, sir.
Kaysville City standard for public storm drain systems is 15-inch minimum. The pipe that's shown as 12-inch pipe is part of the private system and is not the city system. Therefore, it's not required to meet our standard.
Okay, so this note was received by Geostrata from you, and which they gave you salient advice, gave you a nice accolade. Why did you tell them it was 15-inch, that it had to be 15-inch?
As I just explained, the city standard requires 15-inch minimum pipe for city storm drain.
Okay. So the next bullet says detention or other method of control must be provided for a 100-year storm event. Is that the same answer? That we only require that when it's public and not in a PRUD?
No, sir. That's detention basin or other methods of whatever the words were there. So their overflow system takes care of the 100-year storm outside of the detention.
So where's their overflow system going to? Through the down through the storm drain and the orifice plate?
No, it bypasses the orifice plate to the pipe below that has additional capacity.
Okay. And then speaking of the detention basin, so in your words, you're saying this design meets a 100-year storm criteria?
As defined in our ordinance, yes, sir.
I'm not sure if the calculations in this report equate to that. In the engineer's calculations of the pond, I don't think it adds up to a 100-year storm. The placement of the pond, what happens when that pond overflows? And Lot 1 becomes Noah's Ark at the heel of that pond. The pond itself is not a 100-year basin.
The pond is designed so that if it exceeds capacity, it will spill over the spillway back into the storm drain pipe that is not encumbered with the orifice plate.
The storm drain to the north?
Yes, sir.
And your time's expired, Councilmember Adams.
Wow. I would like to have one gratuity point. There is a requirement in the geotechnical report for footing drains. Have we addressed that?
They've removed footing drains from the design because there was not a elevation that would receive it.
Is that a liability we're willing to take on to allow them to go against the geotechnical report?
I would have to review that geotechnical report and see what the alternatives are.
Okay. One last word, Mayor, if you don't mind, just that we are giving up a right-of-way here. So folks in the audience who are new to this issue, there's a right-of-way that you guys currently own in the middle of this development. And that's where one of your neighbors is being affected. His property is being barred off by this development. I'm not trying to be antagonistic towards this developer, but we need to be cautious and we need to be courteous as to where we bar people off from right-of-ways that we own as a city. This is a difficult issue. I would love to hear some feedback on that footing drain issue, and I think we ought to take a little more time to take a look at that. When a geotechnical engineer says you need a footing drain, typically you need a footing drain, and there never was a geotechnical, never was a groundwater testing pit done on Lot 1, which is the lowest point of this project. All the pits were dug up on the high point. You're not going to find really your worst case groundwater scenario there.
Councilmember, I'm sure well over your time at this point.
Commissioner, I offer my thanks for the extension. I appreciate you.
I think it's not a commissioner, but I appreciate that.
Chairman, my apologies.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect as much. So I think we've had all the comments. We currently have a motion and a second on the table. Councilmember Page, will you start a vote for us, please?
Aye.
Aye.
We're in the middle of a vote. You're more than welcome to come back and ask us to revisit the item, but technical questions are best asked during that time. Substitute motions, you're more than welcome to make one now if you'd like. We're happy to address it. Great. Let's hear it.
Simple substitute motion that we table the item until we allow our engineering department to gain more clarity on the groundwater and footing drain recommendations, why it was in there, and why it's been omitted, amongst other things that time would allow to be alleviated, and perhaps satisfy all parties involved and keep the city out of the corporate.
So we have a motion to table. Is there a second to that motion? Hearing none, the substitute motion fails for the lack of a second. Back to the original motion. Now we'll just begin with our vote again. Councilmember Page.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 4-1. Next on our agenda is final plat approval for the Whisper Creek Hollow subdivision, previously reviewed as Whisper Creek PUD at 689 South, 550 East.
This property is located on Main Street, about 600 South. It's highlighted on the map here. We reviewed this at the last meeting. City Council approved the preliminary plat subject to the inclusion of a public street rather than the private road that was requested. That public street has now been platted and designed. Connects 550 East Street to the Whisper Creek Hollow, or Whisper Creek Drive. Staff reviewed this new plat, feels that it meets the criteria that the City Council asked for at the last meeting, and therefore we recommend approval.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions from the council?
I'll ask one quick question. Andy, there was some of the comments that we've heard tonight and 2 weeks ago referenced the assisted living facility that's being proposed or will be proposed on the property west of this property in question. We haven't seen any plats for that at this point. We've only had a rezone for that particular property. Is that correct?
Not completely, no. There's been also a development agreement approved, so the City Council will not see that project at another time. It's just staff approval of the building permit at this point.
Okay, no plat or anything like that?
Plat was not required.
Okay.
It's existing lots.
Okay. And is there no requirement in that development agreement? I don't recall off the top of my head for a fence along the eastern property or any kind of a, or was that, it was the intent was to have that for there to be access to the assisted living facility from this street?
A fence along the eastern edge of the property was not discussed or required.
Okay. That's all. Here.
Councilor Lee?
Yes. It's been almost 3 years when the developer came and wanted to build the homes in the Whisperwood subdivision. Is that right? It was about 3 years ago?
Plus or minus, yeah.
So I was trying to remember when we approved the development to be built, the main concern back then was water runoff. And I know that we worked very diligently so that the Whitakers would not have water runoff issues on their property. And am I remembering right that when the developer came and built that down where the cul-de-sac is, that because it was going to be eventually taken out, that it was a stub road, that we still wanted the curb and gutter built there for water mitigation issues so that it could run down into the drainage? I'm trying to remember it. I don't know if you can remember, but I know that the curb and gutter was built all the way down and there wasn't a stub outlet right there.
Yes, I believe that's correct. I think you're referring to this portion here.
Right.
We did have the original developer install the curb and gutter. They did not dedicate the back 10 feet of right-of-way where the sidewalk would have gone normally. And I think what you described is accurate. That was in place for drainage purposes. There was understanding or discussion of how to accommodate that to access the Whitaker property in the future.
And also at the time, it was the smaller turnaround right there was all that was required because of the future step out right there. Is that correct? Isn't that a smaller?
That's less than the standard because it was perceived that it would be extended in the future, yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
You're up. You go ahead.
Do we allow speculative development like that? And let me follow that up with, so is there a development agreement then 3 years ago? Councilwoman Lee, you were here. Did you guys have a development agreement with Mr. Whitaker to do such? Did you allow an illegal 600-plus foot long with an illegally non-conforming cul-de-sac? Did you allow that to happen without a development agreement, knowing that it was going to come out?
It was, if I remember right, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while, that we approved the final plat, and Mayor Hyde, if I'm wrong, you were there too, that it was a step out right there so that it would meet requirements. And that's what I'm trying to remember.
I don't recall the requirements that were set at that time.
But if we don't, was there a development agreement with the adjacent property owner?
It's not a development agreement, no, sir.
So it was a speculative move? Was it a speculative move back then that there be a connector?
There was, yes.
And that allowed us to subvert our ordinances? That speculation?
As I recall, this total cul-de-sac to the property line was less than the 50 feet that's required. I believe they paved the park strip, or were required to pave the park strip to accommodate the 40-foot hard surface that we do require for a turnaround until such time as the road was extended.
Any other questions? Councilmember Garn?
Yeah, one question. If I'm remembering this correctly, when I was not on the City Council, but on the Planning Commission, when the Whisperwood subdivision was approved, but on Whisper Creek Drive, it was considered at that point, I think, that maybe that could come all the way down to Main Street and access Main Street. However, I think the state, who maintains Main Street right here, had some concerns because of the position of Nichols Road and also Burton Lane being somewhat offset. Am I correct?
I believe that discussion did occur, and I think you've described it reasonably accurately, yes.
Okay, so what's different on 650 South where that enters Main Street? Of course, those are existing streets in Laurelwood, so that's kind of an academic point. So I withdraw that question. That's all my questions.
Councilmember Page?
I don't. The biggest issue is 650 already exists,
right?
And so UDOT can't remove that access that's already been established.
So maybe I will follow up with that. And again, maybe this is an important question because I think from past when we considered this last time, the City Council meeting, there's some concern that this would increase the traffic significantly. So, and there's some estimates, I guess, with regard to that. How much different does this 75 unit assisted living facility, how much would that impact traffic coming down 650 South compared to, is there any assessments of that? You know, any experience with maybe other assisted living centers elsewhere in town or in other towns?
Assisted living center was approved with no access to any road to the east. Its access only comes off of Main Street. So there would be no additional traffic in the neighborhood, or very little traffic in the neighborhood due to the assisted living center.
Okay, and so if this is required to be a public through street rather than a gated private street, does that, does traffic on that road in your assessment, or is there an assessment, exceed that, for example, on Laurelwood Drive or in other residential areas throughout town?
I was actually able to have the police department put our traffic counter up on 600 South. I got that report today. They just give me a volume count, a 24-hour count. So there's about 430 cars per day on 600 South, just east of 7th East. That it was pretty evenly split between northbound and westbound, so 210 cars coming west on 600 South. If 100% of those went through this direction, through the connector road, you would still be below the acceptable level for a residential neighborhood. It's logical to assume that some portion of those 200 would continue to go the way along 700 East and over to Laurelwood that they go now. So it appears that the traffic in this area would be well within the realms of what would be expected in a residential neighborhood.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Mayor.
No questions.
I started, Mayor, but I had another question, but I think Mr. Garn has covered that now, so I don't have any others.
Did you have a follow-up, Councilor Rams?
Yes. So, can we talk about the gate for a minute? This is question format. I'd like to just introduce it, though. This is citizenry. This comes from the citizen, from emails we've had today. Where in the ordinances does it say that we can't put a gate there?
It does not say that in the ordinance.
Okay. So this is subjective.
Yes, sir.
Argument against the gate. Okay. Where in the ordinance does it say you can put a gate there, such as the gate that is, as we referenced last time, at Councilmember Page's home? It's not a gate for his driveway, folks. It's a fire gate. It's the same thing we're trying to do here. Where does it say you can put a gate in? And what are the parameters?
We have no standard or provision for gated communities. We have in our PRUD overlay zone, we provide for private streets, but we do not reference gates in our ordinance.
So in your professional opinion as the engineer of Kaysville City and over all the years that you've seen us doing business, what do you see as the problem as putting the gate on it right down there where, can I borrow your pointer, please? Does anyone have one? Apparently I do not. Thank you, Chair. What is the issue, since this is all subjective, what is the issue with having a gate right here? Right now, currently, if Mr. Whitaker doesn't sell, there is a gate there. It's called a barn, and it will never go away. So what is the issue with having a gate here, I ask?
Again, as you mentioned, that's a subjective answer to that question. The city policy has always been that we try to provide as much connectivity as reasonable as we develop property. We've done this in other places. I think you need to be a little cautious that if somebody on an existing road says, I've got too much traffic, why don't you come put a gate across my road so that cars won't drive past my house anymore? You want to be careful in that regard. I realize this is a new road, not existing road, but...
Could I ask you then, why did you, as the engineer, support the gate at Mr. Page's home and the gates on Windsor Lane?
I think your question's out of
why were they allowed?
Related to this agenda item.
I think it's very related to this agenda item. I don't think there'll be one constituent that argues that.
Well, for the rules of order that this council adopted, in my attempt to keep those rules of order, the questions and the clarifying questions, which your opportunity passed, but we came back to you so that you didn't have to use your time to ask more follow-up questions. specifically states it needs to be related to the agenda item. If you want to ask why the council took action on a previous item, then we probably need to have that on the agenda, but I don't think it's applicable to tonight's agenda.
The questions are to gain understanding about gates. Gates are very applicable to conversation tonight, and I think they deserve the time to explore them as to why there's so much heartache. Another question. Nick, you come to us with a lot of experience. If you care to chime in, I open it to you also. Have we addressed any American Disabilities Act issues here? Have we thought of that? Have we taken that into consideration? Have we weighed that into the decision that we're about here to make here tonight? I appreciated meeting Jake tonight. Is there some form or fashion in the ADA rules and laws that could help put a gate there that would mitigate future opening of a floodgate, for lack of a better way to put it, of residents wanting a gate on their road? Are we not a sensitive body here and concerned about that? So is there an ADA that anyone's aware of that could help sustain the effort to put a gate here on behalf of Jake?
Yeah, I'm unaware of any ADA requirement that would require the city to put a gate in. And I'm unaware that at this point of any ADA provisions that would govern this situation.
Are you an expert in ADA?
I am not.
Okay, that's just merely out of objectivity to gain understanding.
That's fair.
If you were, I wouldn't bother studying it, so on my behalf. Thank you, Chairman.
Councilmember Garn? Oh, I'm sorry. We already went around once. That's right.
Sorry, I was going to
But in fairness, I guess if anybody wants to ask...
never give a politician a chance to speak twice. So
duly noted. All right, so we are back to the agenda item. We'd welcome a motion at this point and then provide additional opportunity for discussion.
Well, I'll make a motion for final plat approval of Whisper Creek Hollow subdivision at 689 South, 550 East. That's currently platted.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll make the second.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Garn and a second by Councilmember Lee for approval as outlined. You each have 5 minutes to speak to this item. We'll start with Councilmember Page.
May I request that they amend their motion at this time?
You can make a substitute motion, or you can ask them to make a friendly amendment.
Friendly amendment to your motion, would you guys consider adding the gate to that where it was pointed out earlier? And just as Mr. Whitaker said 2 weeks ago, it could be removed several years down the road if it proves to be a nuisance.
No, as the motion maker, I would not support that, and I'll explain why when we go to discussion after the motion. Yeah, after motion and second.
Can we hear the opinion of the second?
No, I'm not to approve that either.
What are you not going to approve? I don't think.
Not in favor of having a gate there.
A gate? I was asking to hear Susan Lee's opinion of.
Oh, I thought you said the one that made the second.
If you want to make
the second, that's right.
If you want to make a substitute motion and lay out what you would like versus asking them to lay out what you would like, then that would best be done in a substitute motion. But if the motion maker refuses your request for an amendment to his motion, I don't think we need to hear from anybody else as to. I mean, the motion maker can either make his motion, he can amend his motion, or he can withdraw his motion. But I don't think it would make sense to poll others as to why they don't agree with him not amending his motion. So really your only option at this point, Councilman Rad, is if you want to make a substitute motion, we'll recognize it and call for a second. If there is one, we'll take action at that point. Otherwise, we're back to the original motion.
Thank you for that labored explanation. No, not at this time. I was simply asking Councilwoman Lee as the second what she felt. So, to be clear.
Thank you. So we're back to the original motion. Councilmember Page, you have 5 minutes.
Yes. You know, I appreciate the process and all the people. I know that we've had a tremendous amount of emails that's come to us as well from the different citizens. I do want to correct one comment. I have received emails from east of you of this subdivision, and they're concerned of the traffic as well. I think that I'm of the sort that I don't think it's going to be as bad as what people think. And one of the advantages of having something like this, and a lot of times people have concerns where if they have really a lot of increased traffic, there is things that the city can do to mitigate those problems and that traffic, and that can be looked at down the road. Once if this is passed, it's not, put in cement for eternity. What you can do is there's things you can do to help mitigate these problems. I'm personally in favor of it. I feel very strongly that it's important that we have free flow of traffic in the city and allow that. If we don't and we pick and choose, I think what happens is it puts a burden on a lot of people that I think it's just better to work it out the other way. That's the only comments I have.
Councilor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. This is one of those situations that really is a difficult situation for me personally for several reasons. This isn't the first time I'm not being introduced to Jake for the first time tonight. I've known the Walls for many years, and they are wonderful people. And I know a number of other individuals who live in that area, and I have great friends, and there's some great people that live there. And my support for having it be a public access street, as I stated 2 weeks ago tonight, stems from over the course of now almost 10.5 years of being on the City Council. This kind of decision comes before the council a lot. We get addressed with plat approvals and subdivision approvals that come through where a street doesn't exist now, or a street has been stubbed in anticipation of future development. And when that future development comes, then we get people who are in the existing development who come and are concerned, and rightfully so. Much has been said tonight, and much has been said through email about the council not listening and just ignoring, or having personal gain purposes or reasons why we're disregarding the recommendation of the Planning Commission as well as the opinions of the residents in the area. Perception's what it is sometimes, but I don't know how to describe it any clearer or any more concisely than I have already 2 weeks ago, or as I do tonight. If I was going to be moved for personal gain, I would vote with my friends and would say, put the gate in. But I don't believe that is the right decision for this area, nor for Kaysville in general. Mr. Page is right. We have received feedback from some individuals. It certainly hasn't been people coming to the council meetings and expressing their opinion at the microphone, but we have been receiving feedback from individuals who do live east of this area who are expressing their concerns, and that the traffic that has been added with Whisper Creek and other new development in the area is going past their homes. And as Mr. Thompson indicated, I think that the numbers of cars, if this public access street is put through, that will be going through in this area, is very light, considering all things considered. Now, it will be more than what is there right now. There is no question about that, because right now there is nothing. But there will be through traffic that will be pretty minimal compared to a lot of other residential streets all over this city. And I think it is a bad policy to add a gate simply because we were concerned about traffic. People are concerned about traffic almost all the time we add a new subdivision in, and the best way to handle that traffic is to have multiple access points in and out of any given area that spreads the traffic out and doesn't encumber any one residence or any one street to have all the traffic. And that is, that's my opinion, Mayor. So.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity as well. Just a couple of things I wanted to comment on. I really personally feel like you could argue this. I could really argue this issue both ways. I think there's a lot of reasons to argue it for providing the gate and limiting the access. I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think many of them that Councilmember Snell just articulated are well stated as well. Sometimes we talk about coming to a compromise. Admittedly, I've thought in my head a little bit tonight, if we had neighbors on both sides coming and saying, maybe debating the placement of the gate, would we have come back and asked you have to come back with a compromise on where to put it? Maybe not as much whether or not it should go in, and probably not. I think we would probably still come to the same conclusion. But for me personally, there was one comment that was made earlier about the haste of the decision. For me personally, I could care less if this is decided tonight or if this is decided with the new council. When a request is made to be put on an agenda, then we receive that request, and if there's good reason to deny it. If there's enough facts and information to make a decision, then the city council can do that, and the city council can also table it or deny it or adopt it. But I've seen, I think I've even said to one of the neighbors who lives on that street, who I saw in another setting, that how nice that area is and how nice it is to be at the end of that dead-end street. I don't recall all of the discussion back when the subdivision came in. I do recall, or at least have some recollection. I don't think anyone, not based on any information necessarily, but I think the thought was it probably will be some time before we ever get to this point, regardless. But we're here now. As I look at the drawbacks of having a gate, sometimes people get all excited when we use the word precedent, but you've heard a few comments tonight about why did the council make this decision? Why did the council make this decision? And sometimes that's the drawback of making a decision that maybe was justified on the merits at the time isn't always as easy to be explained down the road. I think if you were the recommendation or the offer that was made by the developer was a pretty good compromise. Keep it as a private street, build it to city specs and city standards, and then if it's determined that it doesn't function, I guess the first question is if the council is totally against even considering that, then there's really no point in having the discussion. If there was some willingness to consider that, to me that's a really that would be a reasonable compromise. The bigger problem we see is, in my 10 years of being here, we've had folks come to council meetings that have said, I pay taxes, I pay my utilities, I'm a citizen just like my neighbors, but I live on a private street and we have to pay somebody to plow it. We want you to take the street over. And the issue that we've had in those past discussions is that street wasn't built to city spec, it's a private lane. And that's why I think the offer that was made, if the council were to consider that, be a reasonable one. We've also had requests actually on streets to have them closed. We even put up barriers temporarily on one street while construction went on, and there was a pretty hard push to keep the barriers up because the folks didn't like the traffic. And so, like I said, I could argue this both ways. If the council is totally against even considering that, I think some of the safety issues could be mitigated. But if it's a matter of no, we just don't want to make a statement or make an action then so be it. But if there was any willingness to consider that, I think that offer was at least a reasonable compromise as was put. Councilmember Lee.
You know, I really sympathize with all of you. You built there with the appearance that you were going to be on a cul-de-sac, and that's none of your fault that you have that perception. But as a council member, when this issue was approved, and the citizens that came that lived on Cherrywood Lane, they were concerned with the 17, 18 homes that were going to be built and the increased amount of traffic that was going to be coming through their area. And that is why we were either going to look at going out to Main Street with that road or having the stub out there at the end where that cul-de-sac is right now. And we, as Councilman Garn had discussed, it was not considered going out to Main Street because of the location to the other roads that were on Main Street going out for safety reasons. But I did put I did cast my vote to approve that with the stub, and I am in support of this going forward in that because I did do that initial vote, and I want to keep to my word for those that were here then that I will continue to support that road going out. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams.
I really wonder what the folks east and west of the dual gate scenario on Windsor Lane are saying to this city body right now. You know, are they sitting there saying, why in the hell do I have to have a gate and go clear the hell around? And you can't put a gate here, especially for the cause of a young man who has got some physical impairments, to maintain his quiet enjoyment and for his family to maintain quiet enjoyment, to know that he's going to be all right. I cannot honestly wrap my head around why we're spending so much time fighting against a gate when there's so much cause to put it in. I do not understand it. I refute, unless the emails have not come to me, but I have access to the city server, so unless the emails coming from up above this property are going to this entire body except for me, which is possible, I'm definitely the odd man out. Unless they're going to all except for myself, there's been one. And those are people I grew up in their neighborhood with, Mike and Joan Frankham. And they weren't nasty about it. They were just throwing out a different angle and viewpoint. They weren't adamant, put that, you better. There was one. So I don't want anyone getting any idea, you folks, that you're outnumbered by this silent majority who isn't here. And it's funny how silent majorities that really don't exist end up owning our conversations, yet they will never come and do what you folks have done tonight and express, sincerely what you see, think, and feel. I don't think this room is for what we're doing. I don't understand why we keep going against that. Windsor Lane folks have to go out and around those gates. Right now there's no thoroughfare there right now. It's not going to change anybody's habits right now. Dave, if you don't leave, nobody's life changes, traffic-wise. I mean, your neighborhood will love it because you and Carla stick around. But so I don't get it. I can't wrap my head around what you guys are up to here. I would like to formally, again, though, if I may, I would like to request to my own body here one more chance. Is there anyone, we do have a disclosure that we are required by Utah State ethical law to adhere to. Is there anyone up here who has any familiar relationships that may have any business ties to what is going on here? You could laugh about it. I'm choosing not to call it out. You can laugh.
Do you think there is one?
I wouldn't ask. It's not mine to tell. That's enough of a moment of silence. I'll move on. I asked. So there's not a huge drove of emails
coming in opposition to what you folks are asking us for doesn't exist. I will welcome them if someone wants to hop on the server and print them out. I don't think that, you know, I think we could look at taking the gates out. You know, I think it'd be very gracious if Councilmember Page was willing to remove the one on his driveway. But all these people here, they bought based on the plat, and I get that happens a lot. People buy based on a certain plat, but this happened to have a solid curb and gutter, does it not? Is there curb and gutter?
That's what I recall, yes.
So it's all curb and guttered. If I were to go by there, I'd be like, okay, that's what's going to happen here. I wouldn't be thinking, now if there was a cutout in the curb and gutter, I'd go, okay, what's that? I think where you guys made a mistake is you should have required Symphony to put a stub into Dave's property line to show people this is what we intend on happening in the future. I'm not calling this a bait and switch. I'm calling it a gross error in negligence and not forward thinking. And you don't even have a development agreement with Dave. You know, so here y'all are trying to say, too bad, this is what we knew would happen. How did you know that's what would happen? We're not changing anybody's lives by letting the developer bear the cost of a gate, and this whole thing, in my opinion, resolves. Does a gate resolve everyone's concern? Okay, I don't see any opposition to that. I don't know why we're wasting so much time.
Councilmember Garn.
A lot's been said already. When you're last, I almost think the best thing to say is, okay, everything's been said. And they're all valid points, and I think the only thing I'll express is just my feelings on it then, rather than go through a lot of technical discussion at this point. But I will answer Councilmember Adams' point. No, I don't. I'm not related to anyone, either financially or by family, who lives in the area. I don't have anything to gain by going one way or another on the decision. So the only thing I can do is weigh everything I've heard and all the facts and circumstances and try and make the right decision. And at the end of the day, I think the right thing to do is to have public access, because I don't see this situation as unique from other neighborhoods. However, having said that, I clearly understand, as some others have mentioned, that when you have an expectation, you move into an area and it's a certain way for a long time, and you get used to that and you enjoy it, and it's one of the great benefits of living in that area, and then a change comes, that's hard to take. And it's certainly nothing wrong with advocating for your position to keep things the way they are. But I do, and Councilman Snell has mentioned this too, there's a difference between not listening at all and listening and evaluating everything and then making a decision. And I understand that no matter what I would say, that doesn't make any difference to the folks who live in that area who feel like they're being negatively impacted. And so I would suggest, however, that if this all goes forward with the vote and that access is put in, that it's built out, if you see problems, please, I know we get requests throughout the city all the time of, people are speeding on my street. One advantage you have is lots of curves. Some of the places where they're speeding, there's straight shots where cars get going faster. And the city's good to put out devices to track the speed and volume of cars, and then to use traffic calming procedures if those are necessary. So I'd encourage you to avail yourselves of those opportunities if you feel going forward that your worst fears have been realized and the traffic is significantly more. But as I look at this, I just have to it would be much easier, actually. I think most of us are people pleasers. I count myself as one of those. I would much rather give people what they want and say, yes, I understand the concern. I'm going to give you that whatever you would like. But I don't think that's actually the job of a city council member. I think it's to evaluate all the concerns of the city as a whole and make the best decision you possibly can. And so that's why I would support public access through in this final plat approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. We have a motion and a second on the table. With no other discussion, we'll call for a vote. Councilmember Garn.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
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 Thank you. Motion carries 4-1. Thank you, everyone. Next on our agenda is Councilmember minutes. Council, you have before you a set of minutes dated November 16, 2017. If you had a chance to review, welcome a motion for their approval.
I'll make a motion that we approve the November 16th, 2017 meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Thank you. A motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Councilmember Page. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We'll call it unanimous. Next item on our agenda. Sorry, we don't have a shortcut to get back up there. So, next item on our agenda is Councilmember reports. Council, any of you have a 3-minute report regarding your responsibilities you'd like to give?
I have a brief one, Mayor. I won't take nearly 3 minutes. The Parks and Rec Department, I just want to give a shout out, a personal shout out to them. They're wonderful people to work with, and it's been my privilege to be able to liaise with them for the last couple of years, and I will miss that. We had a meeting this week in which we discussed some of the community events that the Parks and Rec Department is responsible for every year. And for those of you who are staying and those in the back of the room who are going to be up here as of January, I just wanted to give a quick nod to them that they will be presenting in your, I believe you guys will be having a work session later on in January sometime, in 21st or something like that. That they will be presenting some, well, I guess the reason I'm making this point is that there was some confusion and there was some concern, I guess, among some in the city that the city is not having the New Year's Eve party this year. And anyway, the plans for next year's community events for 2018 will be presented to you as a council, I think as a whole. I think Cole is going to be presenting their ideas and what they'd like. So I just encourage you to make sure you pay attention during that discussion so that nobody's caught by surprise if there are changes made to some community events. I'm not saying that there's going to be massive changes. I'm just saying just to make sure everybody's aware. Anyway, to pay attention to that discussion. So,
thank you. Any other council member reports? Hearing none, the next on our agenda is adjournment. We would just point out, appreciate the service of Councilmember Snell, Councilmember Lee, and myself. This will be our last meeting, and so appreciate everyone's service and hard work, and would welcome one of you to make that
motion to adjourn, Mayor.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Adams and a second by Councilmember Snell to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.